So let's talk about the different roles of the party. The party and the electorate. The party has an image. The party has a public perception of what the Republicans or the Democrats stand for. And so, for example, in recent years, the Republicans have tried to project an image of fiscal responsibility and traditional values, whereas Democrats have talked more about things like equality, civil rights issues, and taking care of the everyman, of the common people. Whether those things are true or not, these are the images these parties are trying to sell. Party identification. This is how do you become a member of a party, at least in terms of being in the electorate? Well, you just say, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. This has become less and less popular, by the way, to say you're either one, although people still tend to vote fairly consistently for one party or the other, even if they don't identify that way. In many states, when you register to vote, you have to identify yourself as a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, and that might affect your participation in the primary, which we'll talk about at the next chapter, I believe it is. Voting with one party, when you go to vote, what you're going to find out is you can vote straight ticket. There's a little box you can check, and it basically says, I vote for all the Democrats or all the Republicans. Or you can sit there and vote individually. You can go through and vote for each race individually, and you can still vote for all of one or all the other. But something that's becoming more and more common is ticket splitting, and this is where you vote for some Democrats and some Republicans. So, for example, you may walk into the booth and vote for Barack Obama in the 2012 election for president, and then Ted Cruz, the Republican candidate for senator here in the state of Texas. I don't know how many people will do that, but that's becoming more and more common to vote for different parties on the same ballot. Independents are much more likely to split tickets. If you identify as a Republican or Democrat, obviously you're more likely to vote for one or the other. Because of this, no one is really that safe. And you can't simply say, oh, well, Obama or Romney is doing well in the 2012 election, therefore we know how the House and the Senate are going to go. That's not true. One of the things that's happened since really Vietnam and then Watergate has been the decline of party identification. And you can see here in this graph, well, actually the Republicans have remained fairly consistent in the 25 to 30% range. But more and more people have identified themselves as independents. And that's actually gone up sharply since 2008 when this graph ends. It is becoming less and less fashionable, and fewer people are interested in identifying themselves with one party or the other, as there is a fairly high degree of dissatisfaction with both political parties. As I said, you probably remember from your U.S. history class, since the crisis of confidence in our government that surrounded things like Vietnam, the Civil Rights Movement, and of course followed closely by Watergate. Fewer and fewer people are willing to identify publicly with one party or the other. The second role of the party is the party organization. These are people that work for the party. They might be volunteers, but more commonly we're talking about the people who actually get a paycheck for working for the party. Now there are parties at the local level. So every county, for example, has a Democratic and a Republican party. These used to be, in cities, were called party machines. We don't use that term much anymore, but party machines used to run cities. Really in the late 1800s and through about the first third, maybe half of the 1900s, every city in America virtually had one party or the other that controlled its politics. You may think about Tammany Hall or Boss Tweed. These were city or county party machines that ran everything. And they did this largely through patronage. These are jobs or promotions or contracts given for political reasons. So, for example, if you're a good boy and you support my political party and my candidacy, when I get elected, I may give you that contract to build that road, or I may hire your son in a nice, cushy government job. And this is very real, and this was a very powerful force. And it still exists to some extent today. Huey Long, the Kingfish, the governor of Louisiana, who some thought could threaten Roosevelt, was actually shot and killed because he shorted someone on a patronage job that they thought was coming to them. Due to progressive reforms, the party machines were severely weakened, and the local party was dramatically reduced in power. And so that's why we don't really have party machines like we used to anymore today in our cities. One of the things this did was shift the power from the city level to the county level, although the county level is nothing like the power the city level used to have. There are 50 state parties for the Democrats and the Republicans, meaning that every state has its own party, and they do not necessarily agree on anything. If you're a Democrat in New York, you're going to have a completely different set of policies for your state party than the Democratic Party of, say, Wyoming or Nebraska. And you may differ on issues like abortion or gun control or things like that. So the state parties are very, very different in terms of even the issues they endorse and support. And, of course, they're run by different people, and some are run much more effectively than others, and some are run pretty ineffectively. Some states have a closed primary. The state parties run the primaries. In a closed primary, you have to register with that party to vote. So remember I said earlier, in some states, you have to identify as a Democratic or Republican or an independent voter. In a closed primary, only the Democratic voters can vote in the Democratic primary. Only the Republicans can vote in the Republican primary. And independents don't get to vote in either primary. In an open primary, you can vote in any primary you want, although you can only vote in one primary. We're in Texas, of course. Texas has open primaries. I can go vote in the Democratic or Republican primary as I see fit. In blanket primaries, there's only one primary. Voters are given, these are very rare, but voters are just given a list of candidates. You don't have one for the Democrats and one for the Republicans. State parties are better organized in terms of headquarters and budgets than they used to be. A lot of the power shifted away from the city machines to the state parties after the progressive reforms. And the state parties actually tend to have a fair amount of power. There's also a national party, but the national party does not have much control over what the individual state parties will do, and therefore you'll have wild variations in policy positions and tactics from state to state. The National Party organizes the national conventions. This is a meeting of party delegates every 4 years. They choose they organize the primary process to choose the presidential candidates, and they sit down and they write a platform. A platform is simply a list of all the things the party believes in and what they plan on doing if they get elected. The National Party is run by a national committee. This is one of the institutions that keeps the party operating between conventions. And this basically these days fundraises and tries to coordinate with the state parties with more or less success. They also have a national chairperson, and this person is the face of the party in a lot of ways. He's constantly on TV, or she's constantly on TV, trying to raise funds or get the message out. And if you watch much news, you'll see both the Republican and the Democratic heads on TV a lot. Finally, we have the party and government. These are party members that are actually elected to govern. Which party controls the government has significant policy consequences. I think regardless of which side you're on, I think the idea that there was no difference between Gore and Bush that I mentioned earlier during the 2000 election proved to be really, really untrue after the election of 2000. Remember I said in the beginning that a party is not a group of principles or ideals. It's a bunch of people trying to win an election. And to do this, you create coalitions, meaning you get groups of voters who are willing, are people interested in the policy, who are willing to team up with policies they may or may not share a common interest in to get elected. When I talk about party errors in a minute, I'm going to talk a lot about coalitions. But understand, every political party has coalitions, and sometimes they don't make a lot of sense. So these are the different groups of voters or the different issues that voters get excited about that a party tries to cobble together to win an election. And I'm going to talk a lot in detail about that in just a minute when I talk about party eras in American history. Whoops. Parties and politicians generally do what they say they're going to do. There's lots and lots of talk about broken promises and things like this. But the reality is studies have shown that while we certainly can point to broken promises, the general reality is that they do tend to do what they say they're going to do. Here's a little excerpt, a discussion about the party platforms in 2008. You can pause this and read it if you want. We're going to look at an article in class about the different platforms in a little more detail.